A world of fierce competition and rapidly shifting markets, one question dominates the mind of every business leader, entrepreneur, and strategist. What truly determines the success or failure of an industry? Whether you're launching a startup, investing in a new market, or just trying to outsmart your competition, understanding these five forces gives you a strategic advantage. Industry analysis, analyzing the task environment. An industry is a group of firms producing a similar product or service, such as soft drinks and financial services. An examination of the important stakeholder groups, such as suppliers and customers, particular corporations' task environment, is a part of industry analysis. Porter's approach to industry analysis. Michael Porter, an authority on competitive strategy, contend that a corporation is most concerned with the intensity of competition within its industry. The collective strength of these forces, he contends, determines the ultimate profit potential in the industry, where profit potential is measured in terms of long-run return on invested capital. In carefully scanning its industry, the corporation must assess the importance to its success of each of the six forces: threat of new entrants, rivalry among existing firms, threat of substitute products or services, bargaining power of buyers, bargaining power of suppliers, and relative power of stakeholders. The stronger each of these forces, the more limited companies are in their ability to raise prices and earn greater profits. Although Porter mentions only five forces, six other stakeholders added here to reflect the power that governments, local communities, and other groups from the task environment wield over industry activities. Threat of new entrants. New entrants to an industry typically bring to it new capacity, a desire to gain market share, and substantial resources. They are, therefore, threats to an established corporation. The threat of entry depends on the presence of entry barriers and the reaction that can be expected from existing competitors. An entry barrier is an obstruction that makes it difficult for a company to enter an industry. For example, no new domestic automobile companies have been fully established in the United States since the 1930s because of the high capital requirements to build production facilities and to develop a dealer distribution network. Some of the possible barriers to entry are economies of scale. Scale economies in the production and sale of microprocessors, for example, gave Intel a significant cost advantage over any new rival. Product differentiation. Corporations like Procter and Gamble and General Mills, which manufacture products like Tide and Cheerios, create high entry barriers through their high levels of advertising and promotion. Capital requirements. The need to invest huge financial resources in manufacturing facilities in order to produce large commercial airplanes creates a significant barrier to entry to any competitor for Boeing and Airbus. Switching costs. Once a software program like Excel or Word becomes established in an office managers are very reluctant to switch to a new program because of the high training costs. Access to distribution channels. Small entrepreneurs often have difficulty obtaining supermarket shelf space for their goods because large retailers charge for space on their shelves and give priority to the established firms who can pay for the advertising needed to operate high customer demand, cost disadvantages, independent of size. Once a new product earns sufficient market share to be accepted as the standard for that type of product, the maker has a key advantage. Microsoft development of the first widely adopted operating system, MS-DOS, for the IBM-type personal computer gave it a significant competitive advantage over potential competitors. Its introduction of Windows helped to cement that advantage so that the Microsoft operating system is now on over 90% of personal computers worldwide. Government policy. Governments can limit entry into an industry through licensing requirements by restricting access to raw materials, such as oil drilling sites in protected areas. Rivalry among existing firms. In most industries, corporations are mutually dependent. A competitive move by one firm can be expected to have a noticeable effect on its competitors, and thus may cause retaliation or counter-efforts. For example, the entry by mail order companies such as Dell and Gateway into a PC industry previously dominated by IBM. Apple increased the level of competitive activity to such an extent that any price reduction or new product introduction is now quickly followed by similar moves from other PC makers. The same is true of prices in the U.S. airline industry. According to Porter, intense rivalry is related to the presence of several factors, including number of competitors. When competitors are few and roughly equal in size, such as in the U.S. auto and major home appliance industries, they watch each other carefully to make sure that any move by another firm is matched by an equal counter-move. Rate of industry growth. Any slowing in passenger traffic tends to top price. Set wars in the airline industry, because the only path to growth is to take sales away from a competitor. Product or service characteristics. Many people choose a videotape rental store based on location, variety of selection, and pricing, because they view videotapes as a commodity, a product whose characteristics are the same, regardless of who sells it. Amount of fixed cost. Because airlines must fly their planes on a schedule regardless of the number of paying passengers for any one flight, they offer cheap standby fares whenever a plane has empty seats. Capacity. If the only way a manufacturer can increase capacity is in a large increment by building a new plant, as in the paper industry, it will run that new plant at full capacity to keep its unit costs as low as possible, thus producing so much that the selling price falls throughout the industry. Height of exit barriers. Exit barriers keep a company from leaving an industry. The brewing industry, for example, has a low percentage of companies that voluntarily leave the industry because breweries are specialized assets with few uses except for making beer. Diversity of rivals. Rivals that have very different ideas of how to compete are likely to crow paths often and unknowingly challenge each other's position. This happens often in the retail clothing industry when a number of retailers open outlets in the same location, thus taking sales away from each other. Threat of substitute products or services. Substitute products are those products that appear to be different but can satisfy the same end as another product. For example, fax machines are a substitute for FedEx, NutraSweet is a substitute for sugar, and bottled water is a substitute for a cola. According to Porter, substitutes limit the potential returns of an industry by placing a ceiling on the prices firms in the industry can profitably charge. To the extent that switching costs are low, substitutes may have a strong effect on an industry. Tea can be considered a substitute for coffee. If the price of coffee goes up high enough, coffee drinkers will slowly begin switching to tea. The price of tea thus puts a price ceiling on the price of coffee. Identifying possible substitute products or services is sometimes a difficult task. It means searching for products or services that can perform the same function, even though they have a different appearance and may not appear to be easily substitutable. Bargaining power of buyers. Buyers affect an industry through their ability to force down prices, bargain for higher quality or more services, and play competitors against each other. A buyer or a group of buyers is powerful if some of the following factors hold true. A buyer purchases a large proportion of the seller's product or service. For example, oil filters purchased by a major automaker. A buyer has the potential to integrate backward by producing the product itself. For example, a newspaper chain could make its own paper. Alternative suppliers are plentiful because the product is standard or undifferentiated. For example, motorists can choose among many gas stations. Changing suppliers costs very little. For example, office supplies are easy to find. The purchased product represents a high percentage of a buyer's costs, thus providing an incentive to shop around for a lower price. For example, gasoline, purchased for resale by convenience stores, makes up half their total costs. A buyer earns low profits and is thus very sensitive to costs and service differences. For example, grocery stores have very small margins. The purchased product is unimportant to the final quality or price of a buyer's products or services, and thus can be easily substituted without affecting the final product adversely. For example, electric wire bought for use in lamps. Bargaining power of suppliers. Suppliers can affect an industry through their ability to raise prices or reduce the quality of purchased goods and services. A supplier or supplier group is powerful if some of the following factors apply. The supplier industry is dominated by a few companies, but it sells to many. For example, the petroleum industry. Its product or service is unique, and/or it has built up switching costs. For example, word processing software. Substitutes are not readily available. For example, electricity. Suppliers are able to integrate forward and compete directly with their present customers. For example, a microprocessor producer like Intel can make PCs. A purchasing industry buys only a small portion of the supplier group's goods and services and is thus unimportant to the supplier. For example, sales of lawnmower tires are less important to the tire industry than are sales of auto tires. Now, while Porter's original model focused on 5 key forces, the business world has evolved, and so have the power dynamics. That's why many modern strategists now include a 6th force in the analysis: the relative power of other stakeholders. The relative power of other stakeholders. These are the non-market forces, groups that aren't traditional buyers or suppliers, but can still dramatically influence an industry's profitability, structure, and long-term viability. Who are they? They include governments, regulators, local communities, environmental groups, activist investors, trade unions, media, and even social movements. These stakeholders may not buy your product, but they can shape your costs, risks, and opportunities in powerful ways. For example, governments can restrict access to key resources like land or oil, impose tariffs, or create licensing hurdles. Regulators can enforce safety, data privacy, or sustainability standards that raise operating costs. Local communities can pressure companies to follow ethical practices or reject projects that impact the environment. Creditors and institutional investors can pull funding or demand governance changes. Trade associations or unions can strike, lobby, or influence hiring practices. Let's take a real-world example. When Facebook faced public backlash and congressional scrutiny over data privacy, it didn't come from competitors or customers. It came from stakeholders. The outcome? Billions in fines, regulation risks, and stock volatility. Or consider the energy industry, where environmental groups and government regulations have pushed many fossil fuel companies to pivot toward renewable energy. The key insight: companies that ignore stakeholder pressure may face reputational damage, regulatory penalties, or loss of social license to operate. But companies that proactively engage these groups can build trust, shape favorable policy, and create strategic resilience. So, while it's not officially one of Porter's original 5 forces, the 6th force reminds us a firm's external environment isn't just economic, it's political, social, ethical, and increasingly ecological. Understanding these dynamics isn't just good risk management, it's a competitive advantage. Key points to remember from this video. 1. Threat of new entrants. Barriers to entry are key. Higher barriers mean lower threat. Look at economies of scale, capital requirements, brand loyalty, access to distribution, switching costs, and government regulations. New entrants increase capacity, intensify competition, and can erode profitability. High threat. More competition and price pressure. Low threat. Established players retain pricing power. 2. Rivalry among existing competitors. Intense rivalry lowers profit potential. Watch for many equally sized competitors, slow industry growth, low switching costs, high fixed costs, and low product differentiation. Price wars, innovation races, and marketing battles are signs of high rivalry. More rivalry. Price competition and squeezed margins. Less rivalry. Stable profits and room for differentiation. 3. Threat of substitute products or services. Substitutes cap the price you can charge. Evaluate ease of switching, customer willingness to substitute, and relative price performance. Substitutes don't need to be identical, just functionally equivalent. More substitutes equals lower pricing flexibility. Fewer substitutes equals stronger product positioning. 4. Bargaining power of buyers, customers. Powerful buyers force prices down and demand better quality. Buyer power rises if few buyers, many sellers. Products are undifferentiated. Switching is easy. Buyers purchase in bulk. They can backward integrate high buyer power, no lower prices and tighter margins. Low buyer power equals more control over pricing and terms. 5. Bargaining power of suppliers. Strong suppliers can raise input costs or reduce product quality. Supplier power increases when few suppliers, many buyers. Suppliers offer unique inputs. Switching is costly. They can forward integrate high supplier power, higher production cost. Low supplier power equals better input control. 6th, relative power of other stakeholders, added force. Governments, communities, NGOs, trade unions, creditors, and regulators can reshape industry dynamics. Influence may arise from regulations, environmental concerns, public pressure, access to resources, credit terms, neglecting stakeholder pressure, reputational and operational risk. Engaging stakeholders equals long-term strategic stability. Don't forget to put a like, comments, and share. Also subscribe my channels and tap the bell icon. Thanks for watching.